Welcome to Hope Stories. Sometimes the most dangerous poison is not the one slipped into a glass, but the lies we choose to believe. Imagine a father who thinks he's protecting his daughter, only to realize the person he trusts most may be the one destroying her. A child's voice dares to break the silence, and suddenly everything he thought was safe begins to unravel. This is a story about love twisted into control, about innocence stolen in the shadows of a perfect home, and about the moment a single choice can change everything. What would you do if the truth threatened to tear apart not only your family, but the very idea of who you are? Stay with us, because what begins as suspicion will soon become a battle for survival, trust, and redemption. The late afternoon sun poured over the quiet park in the suburbs of Seattle, laying long golden streaks across the grass. Michael pushed his daughter's wheelchair slowly down the stone path, trying to believe that the ordinary beauty of the moment meant something was still safe in his world. Sophie, 12 years old, sat small and pale against the cushions, her thin hands folded in her lap, her dark hair drifting over her face. Behind the chair walked Vanessa, his fiancée, the woman he had trusted with everything when his daughter's sudden illness had stolen their lives away 4 months ago. Michael told himself, as he often did, that he was lucky Sophie had someone so dedicated. But a voice cut through the silence, shattering the fragile calm. "Your daughter can walk," Ethan said breathlessly, his words tumbling into the air like stones thrown into still water. "But she isn't allowed to." The boy, only 11, stood in front of them with dirt smeared across his face, his chest heaving from the sprint down the path. His hands shook as he pointed at Vanessa, and though fear clung to him, there was a strange fire in his eyes. Michael froze, his grip tightening on the chair handles, his pulse rising like a drumbeat in his ears. He turned fully toward the boy. "Say that again." Ethan swallowed, his voice cracking but unwavering. "She puts things in Sophie's food, things that make her legs stop working. I've seen it. She thinks nobody's watching, but I was. She mixes something from a small bottle into Sophie's juice." For the first time in months, Sophie lifted her head and looked at him, then at Vanessa. Her eyes, large and tired, held a flicker of something Michael had not seen in too long. Hope, or maybe fear, wrapped around hope. Vanessa's lips curved into a brittle smile. "Michael, please. He's a child. Kids make things up. They confuse dreams with reality." "I'm not making it up." Ethan's voice cracked as tears streaked down his dirt-stained cheeks. "My mom works in your house every day. I see what happens when you're gone. I know when something's wrong." Michael crouched down, his eyes locking with the boy's. He felt the boy's shoulders tense beneath his hands, every muscle taut as if ready to bolt. But there was urgency, a desperate truth trembling in him that Michael couldn't dismiss. "Tell me everything," slowly. The story spilled out. How Sophie had once tried to stand when Vanessa wasn't around, holding onto the wall or the kitchen table. How her legs shook, but she managed steps. How she was forced into silence by the weight of someone always watching. And how Vanessa always prepared Sophie's food and drink alone, refusing help, hiding bottles. Vanessa laughed sharply, though her eyes never softened. "You're going to believe the fantasies of a child over me? I'm the one who bathes her, dresses her, fights for her every single day." But Sophie's voice cut through, small yet steady. "It's true, Dad. Sometimes I feel my legs. Sometimes they hurt. Sometimes I try to move my toes when she isn't looking. They move. Not much, but they do." Michael's throat tightened. He turned to Vanessa. "What neurologists? What doctors? I've never seen a single record. Not one prescription. Not one exam result. You never let me come." Her answer was too quick, too rehearsed. "You know Sophie gets agitated with too many people," the doctors insisted. "No doctors ever came," Ethan interrupted, his voice steadier now. "My mom's in your house every day. She's never seen them. Sophie never leaves. The chair never moves." Michael's chest hollowed out with cold dread. His memories rearranged themselves, the lies folding back on one another. 4 months of trust, of blind faith in the woman who stood at his side, and every thread was unraveling. He looked at Sophie, his voice gentler now, trembling with both hope and terror. "Can you feel your legs right now?" The girl hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Vanessa as if seeking permission. Then she whispered, "Sometimes they tingle, like pins and needles. Sometimes I feel them ache." Because she's confused by medication, Vanessa snapped, stepping forward to grip Sophie's shoulder, but her touch was more possessive than protective. "What medication?" Michael demanded. "I've never seen you give her anything. I mix it into her food so she doesn't notice." "That's exactly what I said," Ethan cried. "She hides it. It's not pain medicine. It makes Sophie weaker and tired every single time." Michael's heart lurched as connections crashed together in his mind. His daughter's sudden exhaustion after meals, her unshakable drowsiness, the weight that seemed to press her down after every glass of orange juice. And then, like a spark breaking open darkness, Sophie pulled the blanket from her legs. Her limbs were thin, but not lifeless. She closed her eyes, straining, and the smallest tremor flickered through her toes. Then, unmistakably, her right big toe moved, followed by her left. Michael's breath caught. "She's just having spasms," Vanessa said, but her voice cracked, her hands trembling violently at her sides. Michael's eyes burned as he rose, the betrayal solidifying into rage. "No more lies. Not one more." He leaned close, his words like steel. "Where are the bottles, Vanessa? What's in them? And why have you been poisoning my daughter?" The silence that followed was absolute, the park around them suddenly oppressive, the world holding its breath as Sophie looked at her father with eyes that pleaded not only for truth, but for freedom. What would you do if you discovered someone you trusted might be destroying your child's life in secret? Could you face the possibility that love itself had been weaponized against you? Michael had no idea that what waited inside his own kitchen would shatter every certainty he had left. Michael's hands tightened around the handles of Sophie's chair as if anchoring himself to the earth. The image of his daughter's trembling toes still haunted his vision, impossible to unsee. For a fleeting second, hope surged in his chest, but it was poisoned almost instantly by the weight of betrayal. If Sophie could move, if Ethan was telling the truth, then Vanessa had been lying for months. His fiancée, the woman who had whispered promises of devotion in his ear, who had stood in his kitchen every evening brewing teas he believed were made with love, had been hiding something unspeakable. Vanessa's voice tried to reclaim the air. "You're imagining things, Michael. Spasms happen." The doctors explained, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Michael's jaw clenched. "Enough about doctors I've never seen. Enough lies." His eyes shifted to Sophie. "Sweetheart, tell me honestly, do you remember going to any doctor since you fell ill?" The girl's thin voice carried a truth that sliced through him. "No, Daddy, not once. Only that first time when you took me to the hospital. After that, nothing. Just home." The words felt like knives. Every instinct Michael had ignored, the absence of medical records, the vague excuses, the quiet routines, now flared like red alarms in his mind. He felt the crushing guilt of a father who had chosen work over vigilance, who had traded hours at the office for blind trust. Ethan stepped closer, his face pale but defiant. "She keeps bottles in your kitchen. I saw one, hidden behind the spices, and another in the freezer." Michael's stomach turned at the precision. He wanted to deny it, to cast Ethan's words aside as childish fantasy, but he couldn't. Not after seeing Sophie's toes move. Not after hearing his daughter confess she'd never seen a doctor. Vanessa lunged toward him, her voice sharpened into desperation. "Michael, you can't let this boy plant doubts in your mind. Don't you see? He's trying to destroy us." Her eyes glistened as though she could still win him back with emotion, with manipulation, with the practiced softness he once thought was love. But Michael no longer saw devotion. He saw a mask, and behind it, a predator. Inside him, war raged. Every memory of Vanessa's smile collided with the horror of what might be true. Could he accept that the woman he loved, the woman who had become Sophie's caretaker, had been systematically breaking his daughter's body? The thought threatened to tear him in half. He could not yet fully believe, but he could not turn away. He needed the truth, no matter how unbearable. He bent to Sophie, brushing hair from her pale face. "Do you feel tired after the food she gives you?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Always, especially after the juice. It makes me sleepy. like my body doesn't belong to me. Michael felt his chest cave in. The juice, the one ritual he had never questioned, was the key. Vanessa's mask finally cracked. You don't understand, Michael. She needs me. Without me, she'll fall apart. You couldn't handle it alone. Her voice slipped into something darker, trembling not with fear, but with possession. You've been too weak to see it, but I've been the one in control. I've been the one keeping her exactly where she belongs. The words froze him. Not only betrayal, but control, power. It wasn't about love. It was about ownership. His fiancée's twisted devotion had stolen his daughter's freedom. Michael's anger rose like fire, but beneath it lay something even more dangerous, doubt. He had let this happen. His absence, his trust, his blindness had opened the door. And now he had to choose whether to expose everything, risking a collapse that could destroy Sophie's fragile strength, or hold his silence and search for proof in secret. The park felt suddenly colder. Vanessa's eyes locked on his, daring him to act, while Sophie clutched the armrest, her small fingers trembling but refusing to let go. Ethan stood ready, his voice unflinching for the first time. Mr. Michael, we can show you. We can prove it right now. Michael's heart pounded as if the ground itself were demanding a choice. If he went home and searched the kitchen, he might uncover the truth once and for all. Or he might find himself staring into an abyss that would unravel every illusion he had lived in. If you were in Michael's place, would you risk shattering your entire world to uncover the truth, or cling to denial a little longer to protect your heart? The moment Michael stepped toward his front door, he knew there was no turning back. The house that had once been Michael's refuge now loomed over him with a sinister weight. Every shadow on the walls, every creak in the wooden floor seemed alive with secrets. He pushed Sophie's wheelchair across the threshold, Ethan trailing close behind, while Vanessa moved like a trapped animal, her smile brittle and sharp as glass. This is madness, she hissed, but her voice lacked conviction. Michael's pulse hammered as he steered them directly into the kitchen. Ethan pointed with certainty toward the cabinet above the stove. Michael dragged a chair, climbed, and pushed aside jars of paprika and oregano until his fingers touched something smooth and cold. When he pulled it down, the room fell into a hush so deep it hurt. A small bottle of clear liquid, unmarked, hidden with deliberate care. Vanessa's face drained of color. That's cleaning fluid, she said, too quickly, too neatly. Michael held the bottle like it was poison itself, his heart sinking as Sophie whispered, "That looks like what she puts in my juice." Ethan's voice broke the silence, steadier than before. "There's another one, in the freezer." Against every fiber of his being, Michael opened the stainless steel door and moved the frozen bags of vegetables, the ice cream cartons, until he found a black plastic bag knotted tightly at the back. His hand shook as he tore it open. Inside sat a second bottle, smaller, dusted with frost, holding a fine white powder that caught the kitchen light like crushed glass. Vanessa lunged forward, her mask cracking into desperation. "It's medicine, herbal supplements, natural treatments no doctor understands." But Mrs. Ramirez appeared in the doorway, her apron damp from the laundry, her expression tight with dread. "No, sir. I've seen her add drops into Sophie's juice. I've heard her talk on the phone about money, about custody, about you not lasting long if you kept drinking her tea." The words ripped through Michael like shrapnel. Suddenly, every cup of tea Vanessa had pressed into his hands replayed in his mind. The way his body had grown heavy, his mornings fogged, his focus eroded. He had believed it was stress, exhaustion from work. Now it felt like betrayal seeping into his bloodstream. Vanessa's eyes burned as she realized her fortress of lies was collapsing. "Michael, you're being manipulated. These people are turning you against me, against us." Her voice shifted, trembling not with innocence but with rage. "Do you really think you can raise Sophie alone? Do you think she can survive without me?" Michael's chest tightened. The question struck at his deepest wound. Could he do it? He had missed the signs before. He had buried himself in work, trusting Vanessa to protect the very person he should have guarded most. The guilt was suffocating. He felt Sophie's small hand touch his arm. "Dad, I don't feel safe when she's near me." The words shattered something inside him. For months he had clung to the illusion of stability, but his daughter's voice was truth he could no longer ignore. Vanessa's composure broke entirely. She slammed her hand on the counter, her words spilling like venom. "You don't get it, Michael. She's stronger when she believes she's weak. That's how you keep control." The admission, sharp and raw, left the room spinning. Michael saw it then. The love he thought he'd built with Vanessa had been nothing more than a cage. Sophie wasn't the only one she had been drugging into silence. He, too, had been tamed by her potions, his instincts dulled until he couldn't see the bars closing around them. His hands shook as he tightened his grip on the bottles. His heart raged with a mixture of fury, shame, and a terrible clarity. He had one choice now: expose Vanessa and risk tearing apart the fragile structure of his life, or let silence fester and condemn Sophie to a prison of lies. For the first time in months, he looked into his daughter's eyes and knew that the cost of truth, no matter how devastating, was the only path forward. If you uncovered undeniable proof that the person you loved was poisoning your family, would you confront them directly or call for help immediately? Michael's next decision would decide whether this house became their salvation or their grave. Michael stood frozen in the kitchen, the two bottles gleaming under the harsh light like evidence in a courtroom where love itself was on trial. Vanessa pressed her back against the wall, her chest heaving, eyes darting from him to Sophie, as though calculating whether there was still a way to twist herself back into innocence. Mrs. Ramirez's words echoed like a verdict, tea laced with something meant not to soothe, but to control. Whispered conversations about money and custody, plans made in secret. The weight of it crushed Michael's chest until he could hardly breathe. For months he had trusted her, leaned on her, even admired her for the strength he thought he lacked. Now that trust felt like a noose tightening around his own neck. Sophie's small voice trembled but held a note of resolve. "Dad, she doesn't want me to get better. She wants me weak." The words ripped through him. He had once believed Vanessa's devotion was love, but what if it had been possession all along? Vanessa's eyes blazed. "Michael, think. Do you really believe you can manage this life alone? Work Sophie, her treatments? You can barely hold yourself together now. Without me, both of you would crumble." Her words slid under his skin like blades because part of him feared she was right. He remembered late nights at the office, the exhaustion that kept him from seeing Sophie's suffering clearly. He remembered the relief of handing responsibility to Vanessa, believing she was strong where he was not. Now every one of those memories turned against him, accusing him of negligence, of cowardice. The moral weight pressed down. Was he guilty too for letting this happen? Ethan stepped forward, his voice breaking the stalemate. "She's lying, sir. We can prove it. Test the bottles. Ask the police. Don't let her keep hurting Sophie." Michael looked at the boy, seeing in his defiance the courage he himself had failed to show for too long. But calling the police meant tearing open his life, dragging Sophie into a storm she might not survive emotionally. Could he risk exposing his daughter to investigations, hospitals, endless questions when she was already so fragile? And yet to stay silent was to betray her again. Vanessa suddenly shifted her tone, her voice dropping to a whisper filled with venomous calm. "You think you've caught me, but you don't understand. I've kept records, notes. If you drag me into this, if you shame me, I'll take everything with me. I'll show the world how unfit you are, how you abandoned Sophie for work." Who will they believe, Michael? The devoted fiancé who sacrificed everything, or the father who wasn't even there when his daughter needed him? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Michael's heart stuttered. She was right. His absences, his neglect, his desperation to keep his career intact could all be twisted into evidence against him. He realized with a sickening twist that Vanessa hadn't just poisoned their bodies. She had been quietly poisoning their reputations, building a case in shadows. The room tightened around him. Sophie's eyes pleaded with him not to falter. Ethan's jaw was set in determination. Mrs. Ramirez clutched her apron with silent fear. Michael stood at a precipice where every choice meant sacrifice. If he exposed Vanessa, He risked losing custody of his daughter to the very system that might paint him as complicit. If he faltered, Sophie would remain trapped in the cage Vanessa had built. His heart screamed for action, but his mind whispered of ruin. He had never felt so split, so powerless, so guilty. Yet in that storm of doubt, Sophie's hand found his again. Small and trembling, but warm and real. "Dad," she whispered, "I trust you." The words pierced his paralysis. Trust. The very thing he had given blindly to Vanessa was now being offered back to him by the one person who mattered most. Michael knew then that the next step would define not just Sophie's fate, but his own soul. If you were standing in Michael's place, would you risk your reputation, your stability, and possibly your future to expose the truth? Or would you stay silent to protect what little you have left? Michael's next move would not only confront Vanessa's lies, but force him to face his own deepest failures as a father. Michael's grip on the bottles tightened until his knuckles whitened, his breath ragged as if he had run miles though he had only crossed his own kitchen. Vanessa leaned against the counter, eyes dark and glinting, no longer pleading but calculating. The woman he thought he loved was gone. In her place stood someone who looked at him not as a partner, but as an obstacle. Sophie's hand still clutched his sleeve, her presence grounding him, but inside he was a storm of doubt and rage. He wanted to call the police, to end this nightmare with a single phone call, but Vanessa's threat echoed in his skull. She had notes, a narrative that could destroy him. What if she was right? What if exposing her meant losing Sophie forever? His silence had already failed his daughter once. Could he afford another mistake? Vanessa's voice cut into the turmoil. "Think carefully, Michael. One call, and it all unravels. Not just for me, for you too. Do you think the courts will believe a father who barely came home, who signed away his daughter's care to a woman he barely knew?" Her words dripped with venom because they were wrapped in truth. Michael flinched, feeling the sting of his own neglect. He had buried himself in work, convincing himself it was for Sophie's future, when in truth it had been a refuge from grief and responsibility. Vanessa had stepped into that void, and he had let her. Now he had to face the possibility that his negligence had not only enabled her, but endangered the one person he swore to protect. Ethan stepped forward, eyes fierce, his small body trembling but unbroken. "She can't win if you don't let her. You're Sophie's dad, that matters. You still have a choice." Michael's chest ached at the boy's words, so simple yet heavier than any argument Vanessa had hurled. Choice, responsibility, two things he had avoided by burying himself in work and letting Vanessa play savior. He looked at Sophie, whose frail body masked a growing determination, and he knew Ethan was right. The fight was his, and he had to decide now. Mrs. Ramirez broke the silence, her voice steady though her hands twisted her apron. "Sir, I've worked in this house for years. I'll stand by you. I'll tell the truth of what I've seen. But if you wait too long, she'll find a way to twist it. People like her always do." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, his mind flashing back to nights of tea laced with lies, mornings spent in a fog, Sophie's once bright laughter fading to silence. He realized with a jolt that Vanessa hadn't just poisoned their bodies. She had poisoned time itself, stolen months of his daughter's life, and warped his trust until he could no longer recognize himself. The guilt was unbearable, but beneath it, something stronger began to take root. Resolve. He opened his eyes and looked straight at Vanessa. For the first time, he didn't see the woman he had loved, or even the enemy she had become. He saw a mirror reflecting every failure he was too afraid to face. If he chose silence now, he would be no better than her. He would be complicit. The weight of fatherhood pressed on him like iron, but with it came clarity. Sophie's hand tightened on his sleeve again, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad, please." Michael inhaled sharply, the sound ragged but resolute. He turned to Vanessa, his voice low, steady, and more dangerous than anger. "This ends tonight. No more shadows, no more lies." Vanessa's expression flickered, a mask breaking under the strain of truth, but she still smiled, sharp and cruel. "Be careful, Michael. Once you shine light into the dark, you may not like what you see. If you were in Michael's place, would you risk exposing the darkness no matter the cost? or protect yourself by keeping some truths buried. Michael had finally chosen to confront the monster in his own home, but the true cost of that choice was only beginning to reveal itself. Michael stood in the center of his kitchen, the two bottles on the counter gleaming like fragments of a shattered trust. Vanessa leaned against the far wall, her arms folded tightly, her smile sharpened into defiance. Sophie's small hand still clung to his sleeve, and Michael felt the trembling warmth of her grip anchor him against the tide of fear threatening to pull him under. For a long moment, the house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rhythm of Mrs. Ramirez's breath as she watched, waiting for him to act. He realized then that the truth was no longer just about poison or lies. It was about who he would choose to be when the darkness finally demanded an answer. He reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, but Vanessa's voice cut the air like a knife. Think, Michael. If you call them, you destroy everything. The police, the courts, they'll tear you apart. They'll see you as the father who abandoned his child to a woman like me. Do you really believe they'll trust you with Sophie? The words hit him where he was weakest. His chest tightened with the weight of every late night at the office, every missed bedtime story, every moment he had chosen work over his daughter. Guilt swelled inside him like a rising tide. But then Sophie spoke, her voice soft but steady, carrying more strength than he had ever heard from her. Dad, I don't care about them. I care about you. I need you to fight for me. Those words broke him open. The shame, the fear, the anger, they all fell away, leaving only a fierce clarity. He pressed the phone to his ear, his voice shaking but firm as he called for help. Vanessa lunged toward him, but Ethan stepped in front of Sophie, his small body standing like a shield. Mrs. Ramirez grabbed Vanessa's arm, her strength born of years of work and quiet resilience, holding her back until the wail of sirens split the night. When the police arrived, the kitchen turned into a blur of questions, evidence bags, and the sound of Sophie's breathing as she clung to her father. Vanessa's protests grew shrill, then broke into sobs, but Michael heard none of it. He was focused only on his daughter's eyes, wide and alive, as if waking from a long nightmare. The officers took the bottles, listened to Mrs. Ramirez's testimony, and led Vanessa away, her voice fading into the distance. For the first time in months, the house felt like it belonged to them again. Not spotless, not perfect, but theirs. That night, after the chaos subsided, Michael sat beside Sophie's bed. She was exhausted but awake, her body fragile, but her spirit burning with a quiet determination. Do you think I'll walk again? She whispered, her eyes shimmering with both fear and hope. Michael took her hand, his throat tight. I don't know, but we'll fight for it together. No more lies, no more shadows, just us. She nodded and closed her eyes, her grip still holding his, as if afraid to let go. Ethan had fallen asleep in the armchair, his head tilted at an awkward angle, but there was a peace on his face that Michael would never forget. Mrs. Ramirez lingered in the doorway, her expression soft with relief, as though she too had been freed from chains she had never chosen. In the days that followed, doctors confirmed what Michael already knew in his heart. Sophie's condition was not permanent. Her body was weak but not broken. With time, with care, with honesty instead of poison, she could recover. Michael wept when he heard it, not just from joy but from grief for the months stolen, for the trust he had misplaced, for the innocence his daughter had lost. Yet beneath the sorrow was something new, a promise, forged not from denial but from truth. On a quiet morning, weeks later, Sophie stood for the first time in front of him, her legs trembling, her hands gripping his arms, but standing nonetheless. Tears blurred his vision as he held her steady. It was not just her victory, it was his redemption. The house that had once felt like a prison now echoed with laughter again, fragile but real, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Michael knew the scars would remain, his own guilt, Sophie's memories, the betrayal that had nearly destroyed them. But he also knew that sometimes scars were proof not of weakness, but of survival. He kissed the top of his daughter's head, whispering a vow only she could hear. Never again. I will never let the shadows take you from me again. And as Sophie smiled through her tears, Michael realized that the battle had already been won, not in the courtroom, not in the kitchen where lies had fallen apart, but here, in this simple moment of truth between a father and his child. What did this story make you feel most strongly? Anger, sadness, hope, or something else entirely? If you enjoyed the journey, comment 100 below. Tell us, from which country are you watching this story? Don't forget to share this video with your friends so they can experience it too. Thank you for watching Hope Stories.